You have many strange powers. With the New Alliance Task Force, and we're hearing today from Michael Frias and Carlos Seda.
Good afternoon. The New Alliance Task Force in Chicago is a broad-based coalition of 65 organizations, including 40 banks, and is the only broad-based coalition in the country reaching out to immigrants. NATF was officially formed in May of 2003 and has since expanded to 9 other cities, including Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, California, and Des Moines, Iowa. 2 other cities are replicating aspects of NATF, and many more cities are looking to do the same. To date, over 180,000 immigrants have opened new bank accounts in the Midwest using alternate forms of ID. Over 20,000 immigrants have participated in financial education workshops, and over 800 families have bought homes utilizing non-traditional credit. NATF has collaborated with the Federal Reserve System and the Central Bank of Mexico and has introduced new technologies to offer low-cost remittance services to immigrant families through electronic payment systems. To date, the program has shown great promise. So why is all this important? Hispanics have as a group have an average net worth of $7,900 in comparison to Asian families of $50,000 and white households $81,000. This is partly due to the fact that Latin American immigrants in the U.S. are unbanked, and it is very difficult to build assets and accumulate wealth under these circumstances. Many immigrants are doing business with money transfer operators, check cashers, and other high-cost financial service providers. The goal of NATF is to take these transactors in the millions and turn them into savers, borrowers, and owners, and in the process, helping them become entrepreneurs, homeowners, establish and build credit histories, and save for retirement. Leveraging remittances to develop banking relationships and bringing immigrants into the formal banking system serves public policy as well through reduced crime, lower remittance costs, increased competition, wealth accumulation, community lending, and neighborhood stability. Financial access for immigrants conveys benefits to future generations, and this is critically important because the children of Latin American immigrants are going to make up the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population in the 21st century. Children mimic the financial behavior of parents. Increasing bank account ownership among immigrants will likely lead to increased bank ownership among the children of immigrants. And conversely, if the current generation of immigrant adults continues to have low rates of bank account ownership, their children are likely as well. Ultimately, the economic prosperity of the country is connected to how we contend with the challenge of offering immigrants full access to the nation's financial system. The New Alliance Task Force has stepped forward to meet that challenge.
When Michael and I first met, we had a challenge: how to implement the binational strategy, Partnership for Prosperity, focusing on the human element of the program. We decided to launch an initiative with the aim of helping the most vulnerable segment of the U.S. society, the immigrant community, forming a coalition of institutions and organizations of different backgrounds, federal and local, public and private, Anglos and Latinos, opening possibilities to the millions of Latin American immigrants who are not only unbanked, but financially illiterate, capitalizing on the credibility of FDIC and the Mexican consulate to gain trust with financial institutions in the community. The impact so far has been significant. By combining resources of the Mexican consulates, bank offices, community centers, every day a large number of immigrants is reached out. By opening accounts, immigrants can obtain the individual tax identification number, allowing them to pay taxes, generate history of credit, claim tax credits. By having quarterly meetings, new ideas and initiatives have emerged. Bank branches in high school operated by students, grants for adult education, and scholarships. It has facilitated the small communities to better understand the phenomenon of immigration and the needs of immigrants. It has helped to raise awareness of the cultural characteristics of immigrants. In doing so, financial institutions have implemented new strategies to better reach out the Latino community. The New Alliance Task Force model has been successfully replicated, as Michael has already mentioned. It has evolved to meet the needs of other regions. It is a unique example of bilateral cooperation between countries and institutions. It is also a mechanism that will play an important role in the wake of the immigration reform being discussed today as we speak at the US Senate. In addition to the unbanked immigrants already in the country, this reform is considered a guest worker program and a path towards citizenship. It is important that this continues so immigrants have a better access to become part of the social and economic fabric of mainstream America. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I help me with you, if you might, with the dilemma I'm wrestling with? And that is, it seems entirely commendable for you to have a program which working with legal immigrants. At the same time, the site evaluator told us earlier today that perhaps 20 to 25% of the people involved in this program are illegal immigrants. Help me understand how we resolve if the government tries to catch people at the border and then send them back, and then some people actually get through and become illegal immigrants for whatever reason. Why the government then has a program to enable them to help them with their banking, and we should then give an award to the government for doing that. Help me understand that.
This has been a challenge. Believe me, when I started this initiative, I did not have this many white hairs. This initiative ultimately evolved from a number of initiatives. And at the end of the day, the challenge for me as a regulator was to have some discipline and to separate banking policy from immigration policy, because I was getting drawn into the larger debate. At the end of the day, as a federal regulator, the FDIC encourages banks to reach out to underserved markets, low and moderate income communities, consistent with the Community Reinvestment Act. Second, the regulation that governs the issues that we're dealing with today, specifically immigrants, does not make a distinction between legal or illegal status. And I'm talking specifically about Section 326 of the US Patriot Act, which does not distinguish between legal and illegal status. You're either a US citizen or a non-US citizen. And if you're a non-US citizen in this country, you can establish a banking relationship as long as you present certain types of ID that are acceptable under the Patriot Act, as long as they do due diligence. And the challenge that we have had on this initiative, and more recently in the past year, is how do we strike a balance between achieving law enforcement objectives, specifically money laundering and terrorist financing, and the ability of financial institutions to serve immigrants living and working in this country.
Perhaps I might add that we are working with the Mexican community in particular, but we are working with institutions here. We are working with the Federal Reserve Bank, we are working with the FDIC, we are working with IRS because we have seminars and workshops with them. So we never know what kind of legal status, immigration status people have. We just know that there is a need there, and we need to get rid of all these instances that rip off and take advantage of immigrants in doing banking operations.
Mr. Consul, I think you'll forgive me if you can understand why I prefer to call you Mr. Mayor. But I think this is a fabulous program, and I don't know if it should be directed to you, but it seems to me this has in effect become a national program. You've extended it to other communities with high population of migrant populations. Do you see that helping to further the goal of sort of normalize those relationships, and what's the next step?
Well, yes, there is a lot of ground to grow. We are seeing just the tip of the iceberg. There is needs all over. We started in Chicago, and we were impressed to see the reaction, to see the possibilities of a program like this, and how people from different backgrounds and institutions and banks got together, because we get together every quarter, and we discussed several issues on how to keep being propositive. No, this is a very flexible and imaginative, I would say, exercise. And it seems to us that the potential is already there. And we have had so many different conferences where people come from different parts of the country. They come from Mexico. They come from different other countries because they are indeed following what is happening there in this very special, innovative program.
Maria?
I'm just going to follow up more just to push the envelope here, David's question. If you have a situation in which a number of proposals are looking at government agencies who come in contact with the undocumented and are hoping to put the onus on those government officials to also determine legal status and ultimately facilitate the deportation of those who are here illegally, why wouldn't FDIC as a government agency who through its partnerships comes into contact with people who are undocumented, how do you respond to the critics who say, well, shouldn't that also be part of the overall enforcement mechanism for identifying and deporting the undocumented?
It gets very complicated because the requirements for different agencies is different. The requirements for an employer is perhaps different from for a bank. When the Treasury Department was writing the regulations on the U.S. Patriot Act, there was universal opposition from the banking industry and from the regulators that we would become law enforcement agents. That is outside of our purview. At the end of the day, I try to remain disciplined. At the end of the day, there is no requirement that banks inquire about the immigration status of account holders. And there's also security issues here as well. We would prefer more transparency than less transparency. When immigrants are remitting money to Latin America or another country, we would prefer that they work through the formal banking system because we're highly regulated. It's difficult to uncover money laundering and terrorist financing if immigrants are working with high-cost, less regulated institutions. So just from a security standpoint, we would prefer the formal banking system versus outside the formal banking system.
Bill Klinger?
Yeah, I think I would agree. This is a sort of a win-win situation for a very specific problem, but we're also here in the business of replication, and I wish you could talk a little bit about how you see this approach could be replicated in other areas.
We've been able to actually replicate this in 9 other cities, and we have gotten requests from many other cities, in Minnesota and Wisconsin and St. Louis. We just don't have the capacity. Most of the task force are organized around working groups on 3 central issues: the importance of financial education, asset building component that includes low-cost remittances, and then there's a working group that is basically responding to regulatory requirements. I get constant questions every day for the last 4 years on the issues that are being raised here. And at the end of the day, all I can do as a regulator, this is how the law reads. The regulations that govern this type of activity is under the Community Reinvestment Act, the Bank Secrecy Act, and the U.S. Patriot Act, and I stop there.
Let me just ask this question. If we do get a law, and that's a big if, and people are required to come in as guest workers with registration, and people are required to register in other ways here, would it be your position that the laws that regulate your program should be changed so that those people have to show documents in order to use the banking system, or would it be your position that the program as constructed should continue?
The program as concurrent should continue.
Should continue.
It is not my place to write federal banking regulations. That is up to Congress to make that decision. All I can do as a regulator, here's a regulation given to us, here are the requirements. My job is to ensure that banks comply with the letter and spirit of federal banking regulations.
So would you support or not support amendments that would have the banks be part of a system which checks on people?
I don't think, if you don't want to answer that question.
You don't have to answer it. I'm just curious. You don't want to answer it? That's okay.
David and I have a little discussion back here about these issues.
But we should know whether he has an answer. We should know whether you have a view.
I may have personal views, but my job is not to inject personal views in my job. I get asked all the time about all these issues. Very complicated. We're talking about households with 4 or 5 different people with different immigration status. I can't get caught up in that because then I get caught up in the crossfire. My job is to remain disciplined. Here's the law how it reads. Banks comply with the letter and spirit. We don't condone or endorse any activities that breaches federal banking law.
I'm sure there are alternative views. If you wish to put one on the record, Kathleen, the floor is now open.
We have a whole dinner to discuss.
No, wait.
May I just take a moment, or we are up?
Throwing that sign instead.
Can I say something about it? Well, regarding the reform, if it was passed today the way it was yesterday, I think we were going to be having these new people coming with visas. already well documented, let's say. If it passes the way it was yesterday, we are going to have the process to citizenship of a big number of people, perhaps 6 to 8 million people that have been in the US for more than 5 years. How many we exactly don't know. So we need to adapt the mechanism. But as long as it is the way it is, we have to adapt, and if the banks allow that, I think it is convenient not to leave minorities to be exploited unnecessarily.
I think we celebrate that point.
I would say I was very proud of the fact that the state of Maryland provided food stamps to immigrants who were denied them by the federal government on the grounds that that's part of our responsibility. And here I would make the argument that you're serving at least 75% who are legal immigrants. You're helping them to come into the country, set up a bank, not come into the country, but set up a banking relationship and learning about laws and banking and prosperity and saving for their kids. And we shouldn't penalize those because there are others who come in a different way.
And I may add that
Give me the sign.
71% of immigrants in this country
David is saying enough
do have legal status.
Gentlemen, whatever our agreements or disagreements may be on policy, we do appreciate you coming here today. And we do salute you for serving that 75% of the population. I think we can all agree on that.